So I have here this question: how can I overcome the fear of death? And the Greek word overcome literally means victory over. It means that it's already been secured for us. And so fear gets diminished when I appropriate and begin to live in that which has already been accomplished by the presence of the Holy Spirit, who mediates the victory of Jesus Christ in and through us. And yet, there are some practical things, some physical things, some spiritual things that we can do to make a difference, to partner with God and the Holy Spirit to diminish fear in anticipation of that inevitable day. So to help me address those practical elements, I'm going to invite Dr. Scott Jensen to come. Dr. Scott Jensen is the founder of the Catalyst Clinic in Watertown. Come on up, Scott, if you would. He recently finished a book about doctors and the patient relationship that's going to be published here fairly soon. And I want you to join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Jensen. Scott and Mary have been at Westwood for about 12 years, and I know that because I'll never forget the first encounter I had with him. I didn't know him at all. He called and set up an appointment with me, along with Mary, because they were considering coming to Westwood, and they wanted a private meeting with the pastor. And so he and Mary came to my office, and I'm not making this up, friends. This has happened 2 times in 33 years of ministry. For an hour and a half, he interrogated me. Hardcore questions on theology and Bible and mission and vision. He was really taking it serious. What does it mean to be part of this church? Who are you? He had never been to a church quite like this, and he had questions, and so he just interrogated. He didn't know that I was doing this. I invited him to come today so I could get him back in front of thousands of people. So good luck, Scott. Good to have you here. Well, through these 12 years, really, it has been fun. We've become very, very dear friends in the journey. We meet together frequently, and you could say we try to solve world problems, I guess. We spend a lot of time, sometimes just laughing in good fellowship, sometimes just really tackling the hardest of hard. We don't always agree on things, but we allow for disagreement and real civility and engagement. Sometimes at the deep end of the pool, it's been really a meaningful relationship for, I think, both of us. For me, for sure, it has been. And Scott, I think about the roles we have. I'm a pastor, you're a doctor. We're at the front line of death because we, in our careers, we interface with it so readily. And one of the things that we've unpacked through the years is just being with people and watching those who do well and those who don't do so well, and how some lean into and some lean away from the reality of death. And I've really appreciated your perspective through the years, and I'd love you to share just a little bit with everybody here today.
Well, thanks, Joel. I think the whole question of leaning into death or running away from it is incredibly important for all of us. A long time ago, I had to sort of come to a crunch point where I just decided I needed to lean into death. Death and grief are good partners. They oftentimes come hand in hand. And my mom died young at colon cancer, and Dad died young at colon cancer, and my brother Bruce committed suicide just after his 30th birthday. So along that journey, I came up with 3 things that seemed to really help me deal with death and grief. And they were basically, I needed to be involved with the grief and pain of others, even though I was immersed in my own. That seemed to help me get outside my own little story. I also needed to learn to expect grief and death, because these aren't strangers. It's part of the life process. And in expecting death to be a part of my life, I needed also to accept it. So that was the 3rd piece. So I think telling a story about William would be a good way to give an example of leaning into death. William was an 80-year-old patient who had been extremely robust, had a full life, very active. And one day he was in the office, and he looked at me and said, "Doc, I know the score." He said, "This melanoma is not going to go away, and it's spreading." And I nodded my head. I said, "Yeah, that's what's happening." And he said, "Well, I've thought about it, and I think I'd like to die at home if I could. I'd like to be with my family." And so that began a 10-minute conversation as to, okay, how could we make that happen? And I said, "Well, I think, William, I think we can make that happen. You and your family are close-knit. You talk things over. You've always been clear about what your thoughts and views are. But you'll have to do some homework, too." I said, "You're going to need to sit down with your family and tell them what you're considering. It's not enough just for you and I to work it out, because if you're taking a nap and all of a sudden you gasp or choke or snore or something like that, we don't want anybody calling 911 and having the ambulance showing up with flashing lights and sirens." So basically, we worked through that process. And indeed, William died at home. And it was a very nice death. His family surrounded him and literally sang hymns as he left this side of this side of eternity and to join God's side of eternity. So I think that's a way to lean into death, not to run from it, but to embrace it.
Yeah. I think when you do all the research, people by and large, the greatest percentage of people are conflict avoiders. And if they're conflict avoiders, we're totally death avoiders. And so we kind of detach from the reality of where grief and death is. And really, there's life in leaning into. And there are some physical things that you can really practice that help diminish some of the fear that we have of death. And let's just address a couple of those and an opportunity coming up later this week.
Yeah, the practical steps of leaning into death, I might give you three hints. Number one is start now. It doesn't really matter if you're 30, 50, 70, or 90. Start now and think about it. Second thing would be to simplify. I think simplify is good. And then the third thing is don't forget the lesson of the toilet paper roll.
This is the deep end of the pool that I have to deal with him all the time around. Now, you got to explain that.
Oh, okay. I guess I figured everybody would know. When you put a roll of toilet paper on, it looks so big, you think, it'll last forever. But the closer it gets to the end, it really unwinds fast. That's life.
That's wisdom. That's what you get from this guy. Can you see how the friendship has just really grown deep along the way? There are some other things, though.
Well, living wills,
Yep.
succession planning, identify recipients of treasures, guardians, trusts, executors. Living wills are important, but even more important than that is talk with your family, talk with your loved ones. Give them a flavor of what you want, what you see as important. My living will basically has like 4 or 5 sentences. It says that if I'm unconscious and being kept alive with machines, and it's more than 30 days, please unplug them because I know this is just a dress rehearsal and I want to get on to the good stuff. Yeah. That's basically my living will.
Yeah.
But this Thursday night, we're having an open forum here at Westwood. It's going to be an open panel with people coming from hospice homes and nursing homes and doctors and pastors and funeral homes and crematoriums. And basically, it sounds like a gas, doesn't it?
It's such a way to party. Take out your calendars now.
If I weren't going to be here for that, I'd be golfing, and this is going to be way better.
Yeah. It actually is.
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
He's seen my golf game.
Yeah. No. The reality is, as a church, we're most interested in lives transformed. We know we don't transform lives. The Holy Spirit transforms lives. And as you're informed with some of these things that really do help us and make a difference, don't detach, don't avoid what's inevitable. Come and learn, and you'll actually find lift and encouragement in it. So I'm serious. Take out your calendar and come and learn how you take those next steps and move in that direction. It really makes a difference. In my own life, it's made a difference. I think about leaning in and leaning away. That's a picture of my mom and my dad. My dad passed away just 5 years ago, and let me tell you, he was just averse to talking anything related to death. And unfortunately, it came upon him very quickly. Thanksgiving time, he was diagnosed with inoperable cancer. 3 weeks later, he was gone. He thought he'd be away for many more weeks. He set an appointment with a lawyer the week following his passing with the hope to get everything arranged, which means I was with him the evening before he died, and he had nothing prepared to die. He didn't have a will set. He didn't have anything. I was put in the middle in a grief place of having to help manage all the uncertainty of that. And it was beyond stressful. It was overwhelming to my soul. I wanted to grieve, but I'm in task-oriented move. We have this very small window. Can I just say this? Don't do that to your kids. Don't put us in that place. It's not fair, and it's not right at all. And then I look at my mom, and I go, wow. 10 years ago, we began discussing death. And she's very open about it. She's already purchased her plot at the cemetery. She's laid out her funeral service. I know the hymns that she wants. Everything is laid out in detail. Can I tell you the freedom that brings? It brings life. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's the opposite. So it's really important to pay attention and to begin that process of thinking about that reality that's before us. Now, Scott, you're a doc. And you're a Christ follower as well, which has been really meaningful in our discussion together. And I think we both agree that the anchor of the gospel of Jesus Christ just flows all kinds of hope. But you're in the profession that you've got to be guarded around the gospel of Jesus Christ, and yet you know that hope comes from it. So how do you manage that reality? Because you don't do just physical care. Not in these moments. You're doing soul care as well. How do you bring that hope into those such situations?
That reminds me of Roger. Roger was a favorite patient of mine. He was about 85, and he was now in the nursing home. The year before he went in the nursing home, he was plowing fields with his son, helping manage the family farm for 8-10 hours at a crack. So he was just a gem. And I was visiting him one night about 8:30, and he said, "Doc, this dying business, it gets you sort of thinking." And I said, "Yeah, I think it does." And
Understatement.
I wanted to help him. I knew that he was in awe of what he was about to endure. And I said, "Well, Roger, when I think about dying, I think about the C.S. Lewis quote, when C.S. Lewis said, 'You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You have a body.'" I told him, "Roger," I said, "your body's a little bit like a wart on your finger. It's here for a while, but then it's gone. A wart might last 10 years. Your body might last 60 years, 100 years, but it doesn't really matter. Your body's just a vessel. It's just a carcass. It's your soul that counts. So soon enough, your worn out body, full of heart disease and arthritis and cancer, it's going to let go. You don't need it anymore. You get to go on God's side of eternity, and your soul does the traveling for you." Well, Roger was immensely relieved, and a couple days later, he passed away. And I knew that I'd given him some encouraging words to help him let go of his carcass. It was just a vessel. It's all about the soul.
Yeah, I think, Scott, it's kind of interesting because you navigate this issue of physical care and soul care, but your longing is to deal with the soul even in how you care. And I think for all of us as well, when you're in your sphere of influence dealing with people who are in maybe last stages of life, et cetera, or it's yours, it's your soul that matters most.
Absolutely.
So don't play it safe by just simply talking about the physical comfort that's needed. Crack the door around soul kind of questions. They'll go into it likely, not all, but many of them will. One of the things I've gotten to know about you that I like on most occasions is, and I think I can say this as a compliment, Scott has a healthy ego. Can I say that in a complimentary kind of way? Yeah, he does. And I mean it in this sense that you really like to do things right. You really care for your patients. You want to be sure that the counsel you give sets them on a right path for recovery and help and all of that. But sometimes, because you are human, you make mistakes, you drop the ball, don't always get it right. Sometimes life's greatest lessons come out of those moments. You shared one of them with me that I'd love for you to share with everyone.
It was the day after Christmas, and this had never happened, but my dad asked me if I would help him with his medical care. Now, my dad had never had a family doctor because he didn't really think much of doctors. So I got to have a new patient the day after Christmas, but as life would have it, over the next few weeks we diagnosed colon cancer, and it had already spread. So we had a surgery to make symptoms better, and we knew that this was not going to be a journey that would end well, at least in terms of longevity on earth. And we were out to lunch one day, and I wasn't prepared, but Dad looked at me and he said, "Scott, I don't think I want to go on anymore. I'm tired, I'm miserable, I'm hurting, I can't sleep." And really, without giving him a chance to share with me the breadth of his concerns and his emotions, I sort of jumped in there and I said, "Oh, Dad, we don't need to go there yet. We've got lots of options yet. Chemotherapy can be very helpful potentially. Radiation treatments can take away a lot of symptoms." And I said, "Your kids, we want you around with us as long as we can." And it was just sort of a pleading from my heart. And with a razor sharp edge to his voice, my dad jumped in and said, "Scott, stop it." He said, "I don't need some naive cheerleader advice. I'm trying to tell you what my life is like." He said, "I can feel the tumor masses on my liver when I touch my belly wall. I have cancer on my bottom from where it's regrowth. I just can't go on this way." And what happened after that in the next few weeks was I had been marginalized. My inability to meet Dad where he was at caused a barrier to go up. And so Dad did die a few months later. And I wasn't able to be a part of the inner circle, even though I had been a big part of his life and a big part at the beginning of the diagnosis. So on that one, I dropped the ball pretty big.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah.
Thanks for being transparent. That's a tough one. But you see, the reality is sometimes we make death about us, what we want it to be like what we want a better scenario to be. But just to be present is so important. And I want to give this just practical wisdom as a guy who's come alongside of a lot of situations, and I've had my own faux pas along the way. But one of the reasons, and you hear this, people will say, there are people, when you go into a place of suffering, that you thought would be with you, and all of a sudden they're nowhere to be found. How many times do you hear that? That there are many people who detach because they're afraid. They don't know what to say. They're afraid they're going to say something really stupid or whatever. Here's the counsel I can give to you that really is helpful to everybody, is you don't have to say anything. Because there's no words that you can share sometimes that will ever be adequate to what's there. It's not about your words, but your presence really, really matters. It's called the ministry of presence. Just showing up, that speaks volumes. Meaningful touch, holding a hand, a simple prayer can do wonders to help bring encouragement to those who are struggling. You're going to have to do this quickly. Did I emphasize that, Scott? In your book, I got a copy of the book early, but here's this quote. I love this quote. The traditional focus in medicine is aimed at extending life, not necessarily for the glory of living, but for the fear of dying. Unpack that just briefly. Did I say that? Unpack it, Scott.
Okie dokie. Basically, it's about futility. I think one thing you have to understand about doctors is we know science, and we're trained to intervene. And intervening is what keeps us out of malpractice courts. But patients know themselves, and patients have a tremendous amount of common sense in recognizing futility. What do I mean by that? I mean, when we're not dealing with the glory of living, we're dealing with the fear of dying. And it's important to make that distinction. The patient's voice must be heard. And if the patient happens to be in a good relationship with a physician, that can be really helpful and vital. Here's the rub. In the 21st century, with all of our glitz and sizzle, our transplantations and our new joints, our new vaccines and our new drugs, bottom line, Christians need to lead the way in declaring, "O death, where art thou sting?" We need to glory in living, not fear or run from death. We need to make choices that glorify God in heaven. That's what we need to do.
Those are good words, Scott. Appreciate it. And I just need to say this out loud. First of all, I want you to know I love you so much. It's been such a great journey with you, even though it started a little bit rough. And I also want to point out that I've been a whole lot nicer to you than you were to me 12 years ago. Would you join me in thanking Scott? Appreciate it, Scott.